And then I will now introduce our second featured reader, Nancy Campbell. And Nancy Campbell's latest book, Thunderstone, is a memoir of life after lockdown in an old buccaneer caravan. In 2020, Nancy received the Royal Geographical Society Ness Award for environmental writing for a decade-long response to the polar regions across nonfiction, The Library of Ice, Poetry, Disco Bay, and artist books, How to Say I Love You in Greenlandic. The poems written during her 2-year role as Canal Laureate for the Poetry Society were installed along the waterways where they could be seen projected on wharves at night, stenciled on toolpaths or engraved into fish gates. They are collected in the pamphlet Navigations. Another pamphlet of prose poems, Uneasy Pieces, was published by Guillemot Press in 2022. Nancy has held numerous international research residency, most recently as visiting professor of literature at the Free University of Berlin. Now there's a city I love. Nancy, I also have a reflection, of course, about your work. And when reading your poems, one is obviously immediately struck by the form, at least your latest poems in Uneasy Pieces, which are prose poems. So they are horizontal, broad, with slashes, sometimes intersecting lines. And I thought it was very interesting to see what was opened up by this, how your poems are both open and sprawling in a sense, and also very much contained. And especially because at least one of your poems deals with the loss of language and the loss of words, I was intrigued to look closer at those words and how they provide both stability and meaning, while in a certain sense also functioning as trapdoors, where they give way under your feet and you fall into another dimension. In a way, much like the elements in your poem, How to Discover an Element, it seems scientific and tangible, but you never truly know where it will end up or how the new element or word will be used. And just like for those elements, you have to look for things hidden within things, I think it's also with these poems, deeply layered, with meaning coiled in meaning. So let's bring our X-rays. But before we do, I also have the question for you. What has poetry taught you?
Well, thank you, Miller, for those lovely words. What a wonderful idea. Words as trapdoors, beautiful. I think poetry has taught me to listen, actually, and I can really relate to what Rebecca said in her answer about attention, and I love that poem by Louis MacNeice as well. I think for me, because I work in both prose and poetry is definitely my first love, and now I'm exploring just quite recently the prose poem. I find that what poetry allows or demands, actually, as opposed to my nonfiction prose, is silence around the text, space around the text, and the wide margins and an awareness almost that the truth of the work sometimes lies between the lines or outside the page. So one has to listen very hard, as I'm sure everyone here knows as a writer, to find what that is in a poem that's waiting to be said, and then to make sure it's heard and acknowledged, but maybe revered and not necessarily spoken too loudly back to a reader. It's always a very delicate game to play. Yeah, so teaching you to listen, and just reading recently Dan Pagis, the Israeli poet, again, and there's a wonderful poem he wrote called For a Literary Survey, in which he talks about writing on paper with onion juice, which of course is invisible, but the quality of onion juice is that when you put it against the fire, it can be seen. So he says that writing a poem is like writing in onion juice. It's invisible. It doesn't leave a mark until it's practically destroyed on the flames. And of course, there's that bind. As soon as the paper is too close to the fire, the poem disappears. I think that's the essence of poetry for me.
Wow, thank you. That's really thoughtful. And also I have experience with almost burning stuff up as a kid when I was trying to write. So I know how how fragile it can be.
Yes, indeed.
So the
Shall I
floor
go
is
for it?
yours. Yes.
As Miller mentioned, some of these poems deal with loss of language, and in October 2019, my former partner Anna Svegensoff, who was at that time a translator, suffered a very severe stroke, and one of the consequences of the stroke was aphasia and dysphasia, which, is I'm sure many people know, is an inability or difficulty in summoning words. And um, I lived with Anna during lockdown as her carer, and the poems that I'm going to read emerge from that experience. Unorthodox. After many months in rehab, you were released into lockdown, and every evening we watched TV. Have I Got News for You? Lesbian costume dramas, repeats of Floyd on France. Then there was the series about Esty, who escapes an ultra-Orthodox marriage in Brooklyn and flees to Berlin. The dialogue was sometimes in Yiddish, sometimes in German. One character makes a throwaway remark, an expression which isn't subtitled, and for a moment forgetting you may have forgotten, I ask, what does it mean? You do know, but you can't explain it, not in so many words. We could look it up in the dictionary, I say, relieved to think that there are answers, that although the words may no longer be spoken, they exist somewhere and can be found and perhaps one day restored to the lobe of your brain they once occupied. We own so many fine old reference books between us, dictionaries we never consulted as often as we might have done. You used to tell me that if you placed one of the 2 volumes of the Oxford Shorter English on the floor and stood on it, you could solve any problem life presented you with. I dig out the heavy German dictionary and set it down beside you on the bed. You turn the pages hesitantly. Something is wrong. You know what letter the word begins with, but it has gone into hiding. Where does it live within the alphabet? In this atlas of words, there's no place like home. Shortly after this, you give away all the dictionaries. I watch them leaving the house in boxes, the rare Russian grammars you acquired when you lived in Moscow, the ragged thesaurus I bought in Strand bookstore, both volumes of the Shorter English. And the poems in this book, they've all been published quite recently. I'll do a little bit of a show here. It's called Uneasy Pieces and published by Guillemot Press in Cornwall, as Mo said. I like your French pronunciation of Guillemot, actually, Guillemet, and I've always loved that association between birds and the punctuation marks. This next poem comes with in the book. It comes with an epigraph, which was some words I found pinned to a friend's door in Max Vorstadt in Munich. A little typewritten note that he'd left for himself every time he left the house, and it just said, "Be happy, cause no harm, fall in love," which seemed like a wonderful way to enter the world every day. Eisbach. Be happy, cause no harm, fall in love. Even in this landlocked city where bullet marks not yet a century old pit the walls of university buildings, far, far from the blue shores on postcards pinned up in your flat near the Pinakothek, far from those slow rollers, yes, even here you'll find a cold bore running beneath the ring road along which trams are even now shuddering. Yes, a wave surges from under the bridge, and another. The water will never stop flowing. Flows full as thunder through the same low arches, curve and lull, washing over the same shallow rocks. Always the same rocks, never the same wave. The surfboard purls under a crest, and the student seems to walk on water, crouching and twisting her neoprene torso, listening to instinct, not turning tricks. The trick is to stay on the deck by not trying to stay on the deck, to stay with the wave by making the stance stronger, adjusting an inch instead of resisting, on and on, carving from one bank to another, and it is impossible to tell whether surfer follows board or board wave or wave surfer, and whether a surfer creates the spray or chases it as white petals fall from the shadows over the river. Until the tumble, a wipeout in green swell and summer thunder, distant as gunfire. The water whirls away. Fall bravely. Be happy. Orchard. It's best to soak the roots of a sapling before it is set in the earth. As soon as the new mulberry was delivered, little more than a twig on a ball of soil, you dumped it into a bucket. You offer a mug of tea, a seat in the conservatory. I sense the sap warming in me, little grateful buds. The old mulberries over there, look, on the slope between quince and apple, mature fruit trees, yet delicate and slender compared to the oaks. Consider the mulberries, how they scatter on the ground with a mess and splatter unlike any other crop. I remember the ancient mulberry in the grounds of the hospital. Nights in August, my neighbour often carried a ladder to the tree and climbed up to gather berries that would otherwise go to waste. Not exactly trespass. Anyone crossing the grass from the car park might loiter there, and not exactly theft. Many summers she did this, until she and I spent a winter visiting that ward on the 5th floor to see our friend whose unruly blood poured out of her for months so abundantly that it lost all its white cells and then suddenly blotted and darkened her cortex. You are thinking of something else, of course. There are white mulberries too. You have seen them sold in the markets of Turkey. So many people have never tasted mulberry, you say. I consider the sourness, the richness, sitting in the sunny glass room with you, you who would climb a ladder at midnight to taste a mulberry, but have no need to. I love that last poem that Rebecca read for Cary Grant, and the two lines I want to read back again because I jotted them down because they really grabbed my attention. Hope I've transcribed them correctly, Rebecca. No time to think of death. And we'd forgotten there were stars. Beautiful. And I think the poem that I plan to read, the penultimate poem I plan to read, is almost like an answer to yours. That's quite nice that we've crossed over in that way in this room. This is for the aurora. Lights. I like to stay in and watch. Often I wake in the night to a static silence, a slow, muffled note, and I know they'll be there when I go to the window, dancing, or I'm sitting with a glass of milk as snow falls outside, a long time after I've come in from the snow, sometimes milk or sometimes whiskey. I feel their uneasy moves before I see them. They know I'm watching. They are dancing for me. Left Terrace is different. He likes to drive out of town, always believes things will be better elsewhere. After all, that's why he's here. Believes we will be closer to them on the other side of the mountain. One time he took Asta's car, and he's calling for me under my window. I put my glass down and hurry on with my boots again, don't even button my coat. We drive along the fjord through the tunnel in the rock, out to the deserted valley on the other side with a long name no one remembers. And where the road drops off the cliff into darkness, he stopped, just in time. A bird stirs against the stone ledge as we lie back on the ticking bonnet, looking upwards and waiting and waiting. And I want to go back home to my glass of milk and my bed. But some people just want to lose themselves in beauty, as if beauty can't exist until you have burnt up in it. On the drive home, Left Terrace switches off the headlights. He sees the stars and not the road. Thank you all so much for listening, and it's been lovely to join you. And thank you for inviting me, Miller and Steph. And I'd like to close with a lullaby. Sleepers. I write these words at night in a small room with your fountain pen. Scratch, scratch, the split nib across the page. And I pause for a word and remember another room, a different quiet waiting for a word, a time before and after speech. Lying in bed while curving rails below pull a tram through silence into sudden sound. The wheels scrape, an edge of metal grating on another edge, a screech repeating through the dawn until you wake. A sound that won't unspool into the distance where the rails are straight. Only at this turn can the journey reach a sleeping mind. How could I see so clearly the tram way down the track with its steel haste, lying in darkness on those sheets, my warm skin against yours? How did I know your cool skin without seeing it, and the only other warmth, your breath? And there was silence, and another tram, and more silence which I could not measure, then rush of water in pipes, the murmur of morning. How can I hear it now, 1,000 miles, hundreds of days away? Your breath, ribs rising under your cool skin, my hand on your heart, unseen, working those hours in silence. Silence, no need for a word. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what a brilliant line to end on. Silence, no need for a word.